History did not begin in temples or palaces. It began with people who walked. Long before borders, before nations, before written scripture, entire communities moved across Africa and the ancient world, carrying memory, law, and identity with them. This series follows that movement, not to persuade, not to provoke, but to observe. Because before Israel became a name, there were people whose lives predated labels. To understand that world, we must abandon the modern habit of starting history at the point of writing. Writing is not the beginning of identity. It is the moment identity becomes visible to later generations. In antiquity, Africa and the Near East were not separate civilizations. They were part of a single, connected human system. Geography made this inevitable. The Nile Valley did not end at Egypt. It extended south into Nubia and Kush, and northward toward the Levant. The Red Sea was not a barrier. It was a passage. The Sinai was not an edge of the world. It was a corridor. Deserts were not empty spaces. They were crossed repeatedly by traders, families, pastoralists, and migrants responding to drought, famine, conflict, and opportunity. Movement was not exceptional in the ancient world. It was the default condition of human survival. Empires rose and fell, but migration never stopped. To speak of origins, therefore, is not to ask where a people suddenly appeared. It is to ask where memory formed, where customs solidified, and where continuity was maintained. Long before history was written, it was remembered. Oral tradition preserved identity through repetition, through genealogy recited aloud, through law taught by elders, through ritual, naming practices, and burial customs passed from one generation to the next. Writing did not create identity, it recorded it. When ancient texts speak of origins, they are not inventing them. They are committing to record what had already existed in memory for generations. This distinction matters. Modern readers often treat written texts as the beginning of history. Ancient societies did not. They treated writing as preservation, not creation. Ancient peoples also did not imagine one another in abstraction. They described what they saw. Empires documented the appearance of captives and neighboring populations. Merchants recorded the peoples they traded with. Administrators noted physical features, clothing, hair, and customs. These descriptions appear in reliefs, inscriptions, administrative records, and early historical texts. They belong to a world before standardized religious art, before medieval reinterpretation, before modern racial categories. They are not perfect. They are sometimes biased, but they are direct observations. And that matters, because it reminds us that history once spoke in the language of encounter, not ideology. Yet many modern retellings of ancient history begin late. They begin after conquest, after dispersal, after translation, after reinterpretation. They begin at the point where memory has already been filtered. Africa, in these retellings, often appears as a backdrop rather than a center, a place people pass through rather than a place where identity forms. But in antiquity, Africa was central. Egypt was not marginal to the ancient world. Nubia and Kush were not isolated. The Horn of Africa was not distant. These regions were intellectual, economic, and spiritual centers whose influence extended far beyond their borders. Trade moved north and south. Ideas moved east and west. People moved with them. To trace ancient origins without Africa is not neutral. It is incomplete. This is not a political statement. It is a geographical one. The evidence for movement across Africa and into the Near East is not speculative. It is archaeological, it is linguistic, it is cultural. Pottery styles migrate, burial practices migrate, architectural forms migrate, words migrate. Identity is not invented in one place. It is carried. Later empires reframed these histories. Greek and Roman writers translated them into their own frameworks. Medieval Europe illustrated them through its own cultural lens. Modern politics simplify them further. But earlier sources remain: coins, reliefs, administrative records, genealogies, texts written closer to the events they describe. They tell a more complex story than the one often presented today. This series does not claim certainty. It does not begin with conclusions. It follows evidence, movement, memory, and description, and asks what has been forgotten, simplified, or overwritten. Before Israel became a nation, before it became a religion, before it became a debate, there were people living within a much older human story. This episode does not resolve that story. It establishes its ground. Because before there were names, before there were labels, before identity was fixed in writing, there was movement. And this is where the journey begins.